Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you would like to take your seats and get started, we'll get started here in about a minute. Give the stragglers a chance to join in. Oh, yeah, you're all welcome to come forward. There's a little bit of room here at the front.
And table.
That's right. All right, well, we've got this great conversation queued up for you guys today. We're going to have this discussion that's going to touch on a wide-ranging variety of topics, including current threats, incident response, data privacy, and mandatory reporting requirements. There will be laughter, there will be tears, and you're going to leave the session fully enriched. So thank you all for your attendance today. My name is Bob Wiest. I'll be the moderator for today. I'm a field engineering director with Fortinet. I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years now, and about 5 of that with Fortinet. So what I'd like to do first is introduce our panelists. First, may I introduce someone that I think many of you know very well, Commissioner Rachelle Chong. Commissioner Chong is a former commissioner of both the FCC and the California Public Utilities Commission. Commissioner Chong holds deep expertise in the regulatory environment surrounding the telecommunications, energy, and transportation industries. She has recently served as chairwoman of the, I want to make sure I get this right, Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition, and has just finished 2 terms on their board. Thank you, Commissioner Chong. Next up, we have Anthony Giandomenico. We all think that's a mouthful, so we call him Tony G. He is deeply experienced in cybersecurity and currently serves as Fortinet's Global Vice President of FortiGuard's cybersecurity consulting practice. Thank you, Tony. And finally, let me introduce Jim Richberg. Jim has a long, rich history in federal cybersecurity. Prior to joining Fortinet as a field CISO, Jim oversaw implementation of whole of government cybersecurity programs for 2 presidents and served as the National Intelligence Manager for Cyber, where he was responsible for setting strategy and priorities on cyber issues for the 17 agencies and over 100,000 employees of the U.S. intelligence community. Thank you, Jim. So for our format today, we're going to do a bit of moderated Q&A. We're going to open the floor to questions about halfway through, and then we're going to wrap up with some additional final thoughts. So with that, let's jump right in. And I'm going to start with a couple of questions. Our first question will go to you, Tony. And from your position as lead of Fortinet's cybersecurity consulting organization, you have deep visibility to the latest threats impacting educational institutions. Could you please share with the audience some of the threats that you are seeing in these educational organizations?
Sure. Yeah. So we do a lot of incident response, globally, and probably over the last year or so. I was trying to think of, what do I really kind of focus in on? And I thought some of the key things to be able to hit on is what we've seen as far as what initial access is, what is the most amount of initial access, or what type of initial access we're actually seeing. And you might kind of traditionally think that a lot of it is really around sort of phishing and what have you, but 60%, actually over 60%, has really been adversaries are basically logging in, not necessarily hacking into the environment. So they basically already have the credentials they need, to be able to get inside the environment. Adding on to that, they usually have that right, credentials. So when you get in as an adversary into the network, you can kind of already, without having to do much of anything and having the right access, you can hide within the noise. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of, when an adversary kind of typically has to be able to move laterally within the network and be able to spread. There's a couple things that they actually need, right? They need to be able to escalate their privileges. They need to then be able to copy their malware from system to system. And then they need to be able to execute that malware remotely. The point I'm trying to make here is all that stuff, the activity, is an opportunity for the defender to be able to detect something anomalous that may be occurring in the environment. The adversary gets to forego a lot of that because they already have the right access. So what we typically see is once they're in, they're moving from system to system, kind of using things like, RDP. from system to system. I think from a affiliate perspective, when you're trying to get members of the affiliate program, if you think about it, if you're not, familiar, it's usually a 1-2 punch for the ransomware as a service group. So you got the affiliates who are getting initial access, and then they're usually then working with the ransomware as a service groups, and you're running their particular offensive playbook. They kind of have a similar challenge. The affiliate programs, they want to be able to, have their members run through that offensive playbook. They're the same challenges that we do, skill shortage, right? So if you can get them the point and click through like RDP and what have you, it's a lot easier, for them to be able to complete their cyber mission. So we see a lot of that. And I think when you start to understand that, how are you able to detect that? Oftentimes, it's a lot more, difficult because your security controls are usually based on some malware you're trying to detect and what have you. Do you have the ability to identify when your RDP sessions or whatever your organizations is using to remote in from system to system? Can you understand these behavioral patterns when they're behaving outside of their normal behavioral patterns? What about an actual, internal user when they're behaving outside of their normal behavioral patterns? Do you have the ability to identify, some of those things? I'd also kind of go into, once you have, the right access, one of the cool things that I like, there's always a lot of negative stuff on the defender side because the adversary always has the advantage, but I think we've done a pretty good job as an industry. When we came out with EDR technology, I think it's making a lot more difficult for the adversary to be able to circumvent, some of these EDRs, on the endpoint systems. Now, to be able to get around that, when you have the right access, what we've seen quite often is them actually logging on and, finding out where the management, systems are, logging on there and basically setting exceptions or setting exclusions that would then allow them to actually kind of circumvent, those EDRs. And the other thing I would mention, there's things called, bring your own vulnerable system driver, where you can basically, Windows has a bunch of different legacy system drivers that are vulnerable. If an adversary can load that particular legacy system driver, successfully exploit it, it'll give them system level access that then will allow them to be able to offload that particular sort of EDR. So a lot of things that they're doing, to get in the network. And then once they're in the network, they're able to, circumvent, a lot of defenses. So a lot more stuff that I can probably talk about, but I'll kind of stop there and, pass it back.
Sure. Thank you very much, Tony. All right. So, Jim, some of the attacks that Tony just described, they slip through the cracks of complex security ecosystems. So could you share some of the challenges that you've seen with educational organizations' underlying approach to cybersecurity?
Sure. So, good. Okay. So let me break it down into 4 easy questions because it's an educational thing. How much or many? How important is it? What are you doing? And how do you talk about it? Resources. It was in your question, Bob. And I feel like I need to wear sunglasses to look out into the audience, but show of hands, if you're in an organization that has at least one person doing cybersecurity on a full-time basis. Okay. Now, if you raised your hand, keep your hand up. How many of you have more than one person doing cybersecurity? Oh, wow. We really got the varsity in the room. How many of you have a security operations center? Wow. Okay. Well, okay. 24/7 or just, yeah. Okay. 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 Got it. Okay. So resources, human resources are the first big thing. I talk to a lot of jurisdictions where cybersecurity is a side job for one person, or it's outsourced. It's done as something on the outside. So the first challenge is, and Tony talked about this, that we don't have enough people doing this. How important is it within your jurisdiction? I've had talked to a lot of places where they say, look, I would love to have endpoint solutions on all my devices, but the trade-off is I have to give up teacher's aides for the fourth grade if I do that. So how important is it to your constituency? How do you make the case in terms that they care about? And unfortunately, for those of us in cyber, it often comes down to compliance, to being Dr. No, to say, if we don't do this, we are non-compliant with something, we are exposed. Makes it more adversarial than we really want to be. What do? We talk about you can build situational awareness, understand your threat environment, and then do something about the threats. Well, the reality is, unless you're one of those places that has a SOC, you're not going to have that kind of situational awareness. And I'd say 9 out of 10 organizations, jurisdictions I talk to actually start by saying, I can't tell you I'm responding to the worst threats, but I am responding to bona fide, validated problems, to alerts, things that I'm making go away. So rather than say I'm dealing with the worst, they say we are better off because I'm doing something about real problems. And then the final challenge, how do you talk about it? We get so steeped in our vocabulary that we start talking about things like zero trust, an insider threat, without stepping back to say these terms are actually pretty off-putting to the broader academic community, rather than I do see at least one smile out there in the room through the glare. Rather than talk about zero trust, why don't I say, there are new ways we can connect users, devices, data, and compute resources, regardless of where any of those are located. What can that enable us to do? How can that be empowering? That's a different way to talk about the precepts of zero trust without saying, hi, I'm here to tell you why I don't trust you and what that means for how we operate.
Thanks, Jim. So Commissioner Chong, maybe next question to you. As a former regulator, I understand that you believe in providers educating themselves on good industry practices so they're ready to guard against these kinds of cyber attacks. At the federal level, schools and libraries have been lobbying for additional FCC resources through the E-rate program to put in place more advanced firewalls and other cybersecurity options. So could you perhaps just fill us in on the latest developments in these areas, please?
Testing. Oh, there it is. Okay, so first thing I wanted to say to my esteemed co-panelists is acronym alert. You guys are using a lot of acronyms. Take it easy. Okay, so as you may know, here in California, we had a big attack on LAUSD that was terrible, ransomware. And so because of that attack, it helped kind of funnel a lot of attention on this issue involving educational institutions. So I was working with Shelby last year as the chairwoman, and we'd been asking for more E-rate money, which is an FCC program for cybersecurity, but we weren't really getting anywhere. And I will say that, frankly, the FCC was saying, hey, look, there's a lot of federal agencies that do cyber. We are not the lead, believe me. And so we have to wait to be directed by them as to what we should do. And that was just not an okay answer to the schools and libraries, because as we just saw, Jim demonstrated that we don't have enough people doing cyber at the schools. We don't have a lot of money to do a lot of cyber. And so we have to really rely on more advanced systems, and we need money for that. So if there was a silver lining to the LAUSD attack, is that they organized an amazing political effort and got thousands of entities to sign a letter asking the FCC to do something more on cyber. They had local officials, they had a lot of school and library associations, and it wasn't just California, it was across the whole nation. It was amazing. And so we managed somehow to get the attention of the chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel at the FCC, and she did something about it. It's amazing. The FCC has proposed a 3-year, $200 million pilot program to fund more cybersecurity systems and advanced firewalls for schools and libraries. So yippee, it's amazing. We were thrilled. And I will tell you where it came from is that the FCC chairwoman is very dedicated to learning. She has had an initiative called Learning Without Limits. And as you probably know, during the pandemic, she was instrumental in bringing emergency connectivity fund to schools and libraries so that they could put signal out into the parking lots and all over in the local neighborhoods so kids could do their homework and all that kind of thing. She also has been a promoter of Homework Gap school bus Wi-Fi. Anyway, so we have this new pilot that's coming out. There's some issues with it, though. I don't know why it's a pilot. We could have just gone straight to a permanent program, but I'll take what I can get. Number two, I'm a little worried that this is not enough funding. 200 million. It's a drop in the bucket, in my opinion. Probably could support a lot more. So, but she was clever. Instead of using E-rate money specifically, she's using more generic universal service funding. There were some entities, I think they were library associations, not to cast aspersions, but there was one library entity that said, don't use E-rate money because you're going to eat it all up for cyber instead of for what E-rate's supposed to do. So she used this universal service generic pot, which is wise. But when that's used up, then what? But it's a big step forward.
So I'd like to build quickly on something Rachelle said. I testified at a congressional hearing on cybersecurity in February, and the issue that drew more questions than any other and was bipartisan, both sides of the aisle, was K through 12 cyber vulnerabilities and the contribution of secondary and higher ed to the workforce and skills gap. Somewhat to my surprise, I'd say half of the total questions in 3 hours were about those two things. And this is actually the committee that did something. They, on the rip and replace of Huawei and ZTE, they're the ones who created the requirement and appropriated money for it. So to Rochelle's point, I think there is an appetite. This may be one of those rare bipartisan issues where there's a consensus that they need to help you and that you're also the lever for change.
Let me just quickly add, I think what really got to the members of Congress is the fact that this is very sensitive information about the kids, right? It's their date of birth, it's their home address. And if they're in high school, they're close to being 18, and that's very usable when they become 18. So I do think that got their attention. And I will tell you that the FCC chairman has been a tremendous advocate. And now that she's picked up this mantle, she's a lame duck this year, but she picked up the mantle, and I think she's going to run with it. So this is great news.
Great, thank you. So one of the themes that we've touched on multiple times is risk to organizations and risk to stakeholders when breaches are discovered or perhaps a ransomware attack takes place. So maybe, I'm not sure, maybe Commissioner Chong or to Jim, what should a university do when they encounter that problem? Thinking about both the cybersecurity side as well, I understand there might be some new requirements for reporting.
Well, if you're only thinking about it after it happens, I suspect you're one of the rare organizations, and frankly, playing catch up is not the way to go. You can spend time and not money. Granted, you don't have an infinite amount of that either, but having done the planning, having the playbook, even having had the tabletop exercise where you say, okay, let's assume we've been breached. What happens? Communications. It's not just about technical response. What do we tell the students? What do we tell the parents? What do we tell, the public? A lot of organizations get focused on figuring out how do we respond as if they're operating in a vacuum. And that's how you lose trust, and those are the kind of things that you need to think about. There is a law that was passed in 2022. Higher ed and all education is in critical infrastructure. You're in one of the 16 sectors. And there was a law passed in 2022, CIRCIA, the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. By next year, you're going to have to let CISA, the federal agency, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, know within 72 hours when you detect a significant incident to be determined. So it's going to come down to what did you know and when did you learn it? So do the planning. You'd love to have better tools, but at least have thought through the soft side of this, because incident response is going to become important. Not only what do you do, but who are you going to tell about what happened and what you're doing about it? Rachelle?
Yeah, that's completely right. I want to say personally, I get data breaches all the time. I'm pretty active online. And what irritates me the most is I get a letter like months later telling me there was a breach and offering me, a free program to monitor my credit. It's just so annoying. Happened like 6 times now. The piece you didn't do is that there is also going to be a rule on 24-hour reporting on any ransom you paid. So I refer to it as the 72-24 rule. So 72 hours to report a covered incident, and then 24 hours to report ransom. And I guess I just wanted to say the rules aren't final yet. There was this long, kind of gory rulemaking process, starting with an RFI, request for information, gathering a lot of info. Then they did listening sessions across the nation. But now we're poised this month, we believe, for a notice of proposed rulemaking on the final CIRCIA rules. And then there'll be comments, reply comments, that whole thing. And then by September of next year, the law says these rules must go into place. So you have some time to monitor what's going on and to start preparing to be able to get procedures in place.
Yeah, I would just say, I'll just add some comments. Almost every single one of our investigations, when we look at the contributing factors that led up to either the successful cyber attack itself or the increased impact that that particular incident had, almost every single one was inadequate IR procedures. Being able to clearly understand how to detect, how to analyze, right? How to be able to contain, what are the security controls that you have in your environment to be able to contain the adversary in the environment? How do you then be able to remediate? Do you have the tools, be able to recover? And of course, the actual lessons learned. That is huge. It's just, there's so much kind of emphasis, because I think it's the easy button to say, I'm going to buy a piece of technology. You put that technology in, and there is process that you have to put in place around all that, technology investment for you to really kind of truly reap the ROI out of that. And I just wanted to add that in there. That's every single one of our investigations. They didn't really have a good understanding of how to be able to respond to an incident.
So I want to ask you a quick question, Tony, from your role on incident response and seeing what you see. How much of it is ransomware versus something else? And how much of it, in fact, doesn't involve malware, is literally people getting on with that credentialed access and then living off the land, using the legitimate system administration and functional commands of the program to do what they want to do? You don't need malware to exfiltrate data.
Yeah, true. Now, can I keep in mind that my answer is going to be biased, right? Because it's what I've actually kind of seen, what my team has seen over the last year or so. But 70% of all of the investigations that we went through had been an adversary that was financially motivated, aka ransomware. So a lot of it has been ransomware. So just understanding a lot of those actual kind of TTPs specifically to, and sorry about the acronyms, techniques and procedures, what the adversary is kind of doing in the environment. There's also, what are, some of the advanced, persistent, threat actors actually doing. And one thing I wanted to also mention, even though that I'm saying 70% has all been ransomware and what have you, and I'm talking about those, specific kind of techniques, most of the, the advanced nation state actors and what have you, they're kind of using very similar TTP. So please don't take this when I say an advanced kind of like threat actor. They're all using very commonly known, TTPs that oftentimes mean like living off the land. They're doing the same thing over and over again because it's very expensive to be able to have a novel technique. I mean, it's a lot to actually go to.
Well, I spent 30 years living in that community. I did bad things to bad people. If you have an exploit like that and you don't need to use it because they've made the job easy, why would you use it? And unlike kinetic munition, when you use a Stuxnet, it's out there for other people to find and repurpose. So there's actually a calculation where you go through saying, is the juice worth the squeeze? And if I look at it and go, I can use off-the-shelf malware. They've not taken basic cyber hygiene. I may be a varsity player, but if I can run a freshman level play and get the job done, that's all I'm going to do. And if I can look like a criminal doing it, even better.
Yeah, even when we're doing our, forensic investigations, even when their actual technology did trigger on something, oftentimes either nobody was watching or they looked at it and, figured okay, it must be nothing. I'm just going to leave it alone. And it never really kind of triggered a response that it really needed to. So you don't really see some of that. I know there was one second half of that question. I forgot. It was, is the adversary actually kind of using malware and what have you? Most of the time at some point towards the end, for ransomware, they'll hide in the noise all the way up until the end. Once they're ready to drop that destructive payload, which is ransomware, they'll do a couple things, but by that time they've already did exactly what they wanted to do. But with that said, though, we have seen in a variety of different, schools where they get in, they got the right access, they scatter around the environment, and they'll basically lock out, the Windows machines, kind of, BitLocker. And now, your stuff is encrypted. No malware was used whatsoever. So it does happen from time to time.
All right. Thanks. So during that discussion, several times the idea of preparedness came up. An incident has happened. How prepared were you? So, Tony, I think in your capacity, you see a lot of different incidents from a lot of different organizations. You see organizations that are well prepared, and you see organizations that are poorly prepared. Could you share some best practices that universities should consider that would allow them to prepare for incidents in advance?
Yeah, I do have four. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I like to talk about, but if I kind of key it in, maybe four kind of key points. One thing is, I think a lot of organizations don't understand their situational awareness, meaning that they don't understand what their current capabilities are or their cybersecurity maturity. So I always recommend doing some type of overall assessment, just understanding what your current state is, understanding what is your end state, where do you want to be, right? Because you might not want to be 100%. You might want to be at XYZ level or what have you. Once you know your current state and you know your end state, then now you have all these different types of gaps. You basically build your roadmap, and now you have the 1 to 3 year roadmap on the things that you're going to need to do. So I think that was kind of one thing I always like to recommend. The other thing is going back to the situational awareness. And this isn't really something with just, this industry here. It's just as a whole, most organizations don't have an understanding of like a threat-informed defense, knowing specifically how well their defensive posture is going to align with what the latest and greatest, techniques that the threat actors are actually using to complete their cyber mission. I almost feel like we're flying blind, right? We're kind of, we're purchasing different types of technology and what have you, but not really understanding what is that really going to protect me against. I think Muhammad Ali sort of said it best: the hands can hit what the eyes can't see. If you don't have that visibility into your environment, it's going to be hard for you to really determine exactly what's going on. Any thought to that? No. Okay. So that was kind of the second one. And I also think what I would recommend, if on the same lines of a threat-informed defense, adversaries are logging in with the right, credentials. You might want to look at, different types of abilities or technologies or, services that are searching the darknet and looking for already stolen, credentials. You may actually glean that your information had been stolen prior to that actual ransomware kind of payload actually being dropped or actually being used. When the affiliates get in with that initial access into the network, it's usually a few days before it's kind of passed on to a ransomware as a service group, what have you. So you have a little bit of time there. So I'd probably say, something around there. I know we talked a little bit about ZTNA and what have you, and just kind of being able to, have a little bit more kind of insight on where and who, your users are going, kind of where they're going. I would say, normalizing the noise floor in the environment, would also be something sort of beneficial. And I think, lastly here, I'm just going to, hit home with this kind of final one, and we've talked about it already, taking the right response actions. We have a lot of technology now, and I think it's awesome, just in general as an industry, where we can automate some of the actual response steps it's awesome. But what worries me though is that that's going to, enable some of the industries to skip the manual documentation of their actual playbooks. Before you can automate anything, any type of response, you have to manually document exactly what you're going to do when you have a ransomware attack, when you have a business email compromise attack. Manually document that and then determine what are the different things that you might be able to automate based on your technology investments. You might be able to automate, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40, percent, but there's a bunch of other things that really have to be manually done. And of course, not to mention there's stuff that's outside of the actual technology. You're going to have to do with, communication, how are you reporting and all that sort of jazz. So those are, some of the things I thought that were, kind of important to mention.
Great. Thank you, Tony. So, Jim, one of the things that we think about a lot is all the different stakeholders that are involved. In your past history, you had great exposure to the benefits of partnering between federal, state, and local authorities. Could you share perhaps with our audience some of the lessons you learned, your recommendations around how to leverage those resources for both pre and post-breach service?
So, Bob, the biggest partnership is actually internal. And I think this is the challenge you face as an IT and a security professional. My biggest tip probably is you're going to get farther in convincing people to help you make the investment in security if they see what's in it for them. So if you're able to say, what I'm proposing is actually something that's part of our existing plan for IT modernization, or this thing that gives you software-defined networking capabilities that enable you to do new things with connectivity and connect the students in different fashions, et cetera, because of Moore's Law, is also a cybersecurity device. So rather than you coming to them through this parochial lens of cybersecurity, if you first start by getting those partners inside the organization to see the benefit of something, the iron glove, within the fist, pick your part of the metaphor, can actually be security, but they see how it actually directly helps them. That's number one. Cyber threat intelligence. I spent 30 years doing this in the federal government. I'm biased. I think it's important, to sort of paraphrase something Tony said, you can't protect yourself against a threat you don't understand, and therefore you're not going to see. It's important. It's a waste of your time to try to do it yourself. That's a game for the varsity players to do and give you the feed from that, the benefit, whether it's embedded in the products, whether it's human curated through the information sharing and analysis centers. You've got the multi-state ISAC, you've got the REN ISAC. You need it, you shouldn't do it yourself. And then there are a lot of assets at the federal level. I talked about the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. They have a toolkit for K through 12. They have a security guide, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. Not only do they have this wonderful cybersecurity framework, they have a roadmap, K through 12. We do a lot of work at the federal level that we actually want to share with others to benefit from. In some cases, we do it explicitly for them. And then at the state level, Cal Secure, there are at least 3 security operations centers built by that. Are any of you in an organization that could be allowed to leverage those services? And if you are, have you found a way to do it? And then finally, on the private sector side, you've got Tony's group that does incident response. You've got others that do this. It's one thing to say we've been breached. Quick, let me search for who could help me. It's another thing to have had those pre-existing relationships. Federal Bureau of Investigation, 56 field offices, a half a dozen of them in California, cyber experts in every one of them. They would love to talk to you before you have to have that scary phone call to say, I think I have a problem and I don't know how much of it is because I did something wrong. They would love to help you get left of intrusion, to do the planning in advance. They have a program called InfraGuard that has local chapters. They get together every quarter to talk about threats and best practices. So, Bob, there's a lot of partners that you can enlist, starting within your organization, running through the whole litany of government and even private sector. You're not playing this game alone.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also mention,
Tony, can I just jump in for 2 seconds? I just wanted to say that what Jim was saying was important to me. It's so we just saw how few IT resources we have in schools and libraries and universities. And that's why this collaboration is really important, and using the resources that are out there to help you do your job right. And I think that was really the basis for CIRCIA. Was CISO wanted to really understand what was happening, get ahead of the trends, be able to help people that were victims right away, and also to help with seeing what's happening in the bigger picture so they can warn people in advance. And so even though there are rules coming that might be burdensome, it's actually going to help the community as a whole, and that's a good thing.
Well, and these numbers aren't going to be used against you. I mean, I ran the big national programs. I'm a big believer in metrics and numbers. Is the ransomware incidence in this country X, 2X, or 3X? The answer is we honestly don't know, because there's been no requirement to report, and a lot of organizations won't do it if it's voluntary. So again, it's not like this is going to be used in a punitive regulatory sense, but if you literally don't know how bad a problem is or what the common trends that characterize the victims versus those who manage to not get victimized are, then how do you share knowledge and do better in the future?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, because we were talking about all these sort of free like resources out there, and there's a lot of them out there. MITRE Ingenuity is an organization, a nonprofit that brings in a lot of different vendors, what have you. Sort of Fortinet is one of the R&D vendors, and we typically will work together to see, okay, what's the latest project, what needs to be fixed, and then we'll say, okay, yeah, we're going to agree on that, and then we'll put that out there. There's a lot of projects that are already developed that's really going to help you to achieve a more threat-informed defense. So even if those things that I'm saying about, hey, you need to do these things, you don't know where to start, you go to that website, there's a lot of different projects out there that really going to help you to figure out, how do I operationalize my environment to, MITRE ATT&CK framework, as an example. So I just wanted to mention that too.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So one of the hottest trends today across all industries is the use of artificial intelligence. So I'll throw this to the panel at Broad. Feel free to fight amongst yourself who gets to go first. Can you guys share some ideas about how the explosion of AI tools is making our jobs as cybersecurity practitioners more difficult? And perhaps how do we use these same tools to fight back?
So I've looked at this and said, look, let's step back and say, not only is AI itself not novel, it's been around for 75 years in some way, shape, or form, but it has fundamentally transformed cybersecurity over the past dozen years. Companies like Fortinet don't do malware analysis manually as the first instance. Yeah, Tony's nodding his head. When you see hundreds of billions of potential problems every day, there's not enough humans on Earth, much less employees of our company, to go through that stuff manually. We've been doing it that way. What's one of the buzzwords we throw out in cybersecurity? Attack surface. Which is shorthand for size and complexity. You don't know what you don't know. But I look at this and say, what AI has done over the past dozen years has given us the ability to instrument that surface, if not every single bit of it, the intersections, and it generates data. And we've now gotten good enough at the AI and ML at the data center level to be able to say, I can characterize normal activity. Machine learning is good at telling me what's abnormal, and it's also really good at saying what in that abnormal either matches the known characteristics of bad behavior or has the potential to be bad. Look, yes, there are niches like content generation for spear phishing, where Gen AI is going to make this is not Nigerian bank scam stuff. If it's good enough to turn in and fool a professor, it's good enough to get by you, the reader of email. But I look at this and go, at the end of the day, AI and ML are about big data. And as a general proposition, who is in a position to know more about a network? The people who set it up and are running it and are defending it, or the people who are breaking into it as a black box from the outside? Yes, there are niches where we're disadvantaged, but on the whole, it's our race to lose as the cybersecurity industry. And as the organizations that are using the products where it's just baked in, you don't have to say, I'm running it as a standalone. It's literally just what makes this the threat-informed defense Tony mentioned.
I guess you pretty much summed it up pretty good. I really appreciate that. But Yeah, I think also I want to make sure that anytime this new marketing kind of comes out about AI and ML, and when this is the case now, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of some of the basic things that still need to be done. And it goes back to what I think I said before about having a false sense of security when you're investing in different types of technologies and what have you. And it's the same thing here. I want to make sure that the message of, oh, hey, I got ML and AI in my environment, so I'm much more, secure than when I was. I think it's just enabling a human analyst and what have you to be able to help, better know what the right steps are, kind of being able to identify things. We talked about, it's awesome to be able to identify when someone's, behaving outside of their normal behavioral pattern. On the adversary side, there's been a lot of, focus around looking at these models and trying to attack those models, trying to poison those models. The vendors, every single vendor uses AI and ML, and they've been doing it for quite a few years. But now the adversaries are finding ways to be able to do something to kind of mess up that whole model there. And they've been successful at certain things. I'd also add into the affiliate programs. I was talking about having a skill shortage and what have you, and trying to be able to, execute an offensive playbook. You have to have the right kind of, skill sets to be able to do that. You can easily, with some of these kind of cracked, generative AI, platforms, you can know, how do I, circumvent an EDR? How do I, write this program to, how do I, evade with, leveraging this malware? It's very easy to be able to get those answers at your fingertips. So I think it's a, double-edged sword. It's, it's good for, for us, but it's also bad for us because the adversaries are also kind of taking advantage of that technology.
I wanted to add one thing. California's been looking at artificial intelligence legislation that touches on data privacy in the last year. And in fact, the California Privacy Protection Agency has some draft rules that gives consumers the ability to get more information about the use of AI technology. And you can opt out of allowing companies to develop AI using your personal information. As you know, California is on the cutting edge of data privacy issues, but a lot of states are now jumping on board with a lot of data privacy laws, following California's lead. So I just wanted to mention that. I think there's going to be more of that this coming year, since AI seems to be the new sexy thing to talk about in the Congress and in the state legislature houses. So keep an eye on that.
One final point on AI. I mean, it's a good news, bad news story. I think to Tony's point, the companies that make the large language models that actually make the generative AI work understand that people's biggest fear, for example, is that the query will be discoverable by someone else. So the guardrails exist. The challenge right now is it's not yet a default model like we have for cloud security, where you go, yeah, I understand what the provider does. I understand, the different variations of what I have to do. But the challenge is you still have to specify that. The big problem is we're dealing with a population that is so accustomed now to using this at home that even if the organization is being deliberative at rolling it out, you have people who are using this in the workplace. And I think generative AI has become the latest form of shadow IT that organizations have to worry about. And you can't protect what you don't even know you have and that people are using against them. We've been educating our workforce. They understand why you don't expose personal identifying information and emails going externally. Teach them that if they put a query in, odds 10% of those have on average contain recoverable sensitive data. So it starts by training people what to do and what not to do. And that includes bring your own device.
All right, thanks a lot.
One more thing I'll just kind of throw in there, and this is a very good topic. Start to think about, engineer some ideas around, how these, particular, technology can be leveraged by the adversary for sort of future attacks. A couple of years ago, my colleague and I, we did a presentation at Black Hat that by no means are we experts in machine learning and artificial intelligence, but just by looking at all of the stuff that's open source out there, we wanted to do this exercise and see if we could actually have a targeted attack based on your ethnicity, based on your gender and what have you, maybe kind of where you were sort of from. And, long story short, we were able to about a 60% hit rate, be able to have the ability to run malware, have it on an actual like machine, turn the camera on, do some facial recognition and either execute the malware or not execute the malware kind of based on what we wanted to do, kind of based on, ethnicity, your gender, even there's ways to be able to, I have no idea how this actually sort of works, but ways what your occupation is. So just kind of keep in mind, start sort of thinking about all the different ways that you can do this. If you think about, the Russia and Ukraine crisis, when everyone started actually sort of leaving Russia or leaving the Ukraine, I'm thinking about, maybe Russia kind of could have then actually had an attack on, those individuals leaving, what have you. There's so many different, options or things that could happen leveraging this technology in the future.
So, I kind of have to apologize a little bit to the audience. I admit I've been monopolizing all the questions so far. So I want to give you guys a chance. We have about 10 minutes left. If there are any questions or comments or thoughts that you'd like to direct towards our panelists today, please feel free. There's a microphone there if you'd like to get up. Or you can shout it out and I'll repeat the question. While you're thinking about the question that you want to ask, I also just want to encourage you briefly to scan the QR code. It will lead you to a PDF of a Fortinet publication around cyber threat predictions for this year. I know we're already into this year, so this was published late last year, but it still might be some very interesting insight for you. So let me pause, take a breath. Are there any questions out there?
Until we're such a retiring bunch that we'll have to sort of stop and think whether we can answer it.
Give you a moment. And I would, instead of using the word bribe, I'll use encourage for those people who ask questions. I have a great water bottle for you.
So Jeff Weekly, Director of Research Computing, UC Santa Cruz. Thank you. I lead a swag-free lifestyle, so nice. No swag for me. So you saw me earlier on keep my hand raised up fairly long, and I would say even with the OmniSOC to do some monitoring for us, we have a 24/7 cybersecurity team. We run a Zeek cluster, and we have really nice firewalls and all that stuff. But we're an R1 university, so we're resourced to do all that. On the other hand, our researchers who are facing an increasingly complex regulatory environment, threats from outside and threats from inside around compliance, are really struggling to keep up. So we've started to try to shift the frame there, and instead of trying to just secure only research that happens on regulated data, to secure all of our research. So could you talk a little bit about how the difference between, let's say, securing your enterprise data or perhaps your regulated data versus just the everyday stuff that people deal with in research?
So I guess the first part is to figure out what you mean by secure. Is it no, in the sense that do you mean I genuinely want to make sure that someone can't, do the confidentiality, integrity, availability attack, or do I need to secure it from the regulated perspective? Because we recognize regulation doesn't keep up with reality. Do I need to be able to say I am compliant? Or at the end of the day, I'm really saying I want to make sure my data is secure.
It's really the latter case. Researchers, at least on our campus, unlike someplace like University of California, San Francisco, don't regularly deal with regulated data. They're talking about, you know, accumulated data from their laboratory that might study the genomics of sea stars and climate change. So these aren't data that are, you know, inherent. They don't carry sort of an inherent value other than they represent years and years of work, and they're very, very important to the researchers. And so they want to be able to, at the same time, safeguard them from, you know, intrusion and ransom, but also, you know, sometimes kind of paradoxically share them as broadly as possible.
So this isn't going to be a really satisfactory answer, but there was a new national strategy came out last year. I know the guy who was the national cyber director, Chris Inglis. His thesis was we've had a collective market failure on cybersecurity, and we've left it to the end user to have to figure out what to do and then to consistently do it successfully for us to be collectively secure. So two of the bumper stickers in that strategy are secure by design, secure by default, and that the onus for doing most of that work should be with the people who are making the technology, the IT sector. Can you mess up implementation? Sure. But we really need to give you better things. Is that going to solve your problem this year and next year? No. But this is a way of saying, I feel your pain in the research for community. It applies to K through 12. It's like automotive safety. In the 50s, responsibility for not dying behind the wheel was pretty much 100% with the motorist. And then we started, you know, having law enforcement crackdowns on speeding and drunk driving, made safer roads, taught you how to drive in school. What moved the needle more than anything else was holding the manufacturers responsible for giving you safer cars. That's where we're headed in cybersecurity with IT.
Well, I wouldn't say that's an unsatisfactory answer. I kind of like that answer. And especially on your comment about shifting the frame away from the researcher, because when it's not a priority for them, they won't do it, or they'll find a workaround. And that just leaves us all more vulnerable. I'm wondering if someone could talk a little bit about the shifting landscape of the regulatory environment as well.
Well, one thing I hadn't talked about yet is there's new SEC rules that went into play last September, I think it was. So if you're a corporation, you now have new reporting responsibilities, and you also have a responsibility to have a strategic plan on how you're going to manage your cybersecurity risk. You have to now have cybersecurity expertise on your board, and you have to have procedures on how you're going to respond if you have been attacked to conform with all this new reporting. And remember, before CIRCIA came in, there were something like 45 agencies, 45 rules from 22 agencies, and it was very confusing about who you had to report to and when. And that was part of why the new law went in to try to harmonize that. But the point being, I do think this new law will help focus the types of tasks you need to do as an organization, having your plan, having your expertise, having your procedures in place in advance, and also knowing that you've got to report, 7224, the new rule. So I think this will, to some degree, maybe help streamline and focus the efforts internally.
Let me clarify a teeny twist on what Rachelle said. The SEC rule that came into effect is 96 hours, and it wants you to report on what you're doing. You can actually say we're not doing anything. It's probably not going to be really satisfying to your shareholders and to the and to regulators, but they want to know, what are you doing on this in at least your annual filing.
Yes, you're right.
Just a quick fun fact, I guess. I think, we did a video on this, was it last, I don't know, a couple months ago. I can't even remember anymore. We've done so many together. But last year, when a ransomware, actor group was able to, successfully exploit an organization, and they were holding their files ransom, this organization didn't report this to the SEC, which it didn't happen. It didn't really go into effect yet, the actual rule, but a lot of organizations were just starting to do it. They didn't do it. So what the Ransomware as a Service group did is they formed a formal complaint to the SEC, stating that the organization that I just, successfully breached did not report over to you guys. I thought that was interesting. So you're going to have a variety of different police that are policing this reporting structure.
So, I think coming at it from the regulatory perspective is not what's going to get you as far as you talked about. Your researchers actually care about their data, because they've spent, all the reasons you enumerated. Come at it from the perspective of, let's not even talk about, do I have, HIPAA or PCI or other things. Let's talk about why you don't want to see your data taken. You have skin in the game on ensuring security, and even for students, saying, okay, yes, you use social media to do things, but you also don't want to be victimized in the following things. Yes, we're trying to move the system to make them more secure, but taking it to these audiences saying, hey, here's why we, the institution, are at regulatory risk if you don't do it. They don't care about that so much as how is this going to hurt you individually?
Well, in fact, that's what we're doing. We did a gap analysis this last fall with Indiana University. They have a program called Secure My Research. And we are trying to reframe this whole approach to, it turns out that researchers really want to make their data findable, accessible, interoperable, and repeatable. And there is a huge overlap with those motivations and methods with, cybersecurity. So we're just not even going to talk about cybersecurity anymore. We're going to talk about making their data findable, accessible, interoperable, and repeatable. And we think that is a much better approach than getting into what Michael Korn calls, and Michael was the CISO at UCSD for many years, the regulatory death spiral, where you have a small violation, so they layer on another rule, and that rule becomes even harder. So people, and eventually there's so many rules that it becomes impossible to comply. So I'm very happy to hear that this approach is validated.
So I'd like to note, at this point, we are sitting between you and lunch. We have just a few minutes left, and I really appreciate the dialogue. It's been fascinating. I've learned a ton. I hope you have as well. I would encourage you to continue the conversation if you like. You're welcome to join us at the Fortinet booth. We have 3 minutes left. And with those 3 minutes, what I'd like to do is ask for one small remaining nugget of wisdom from each one of our panelists. If you could, in a single sentence, offer cybersecurity advice to the audience, what would that be? And I'll start with you, Tony, and we'll work our way down.
Man, I can never say it in one sentence. From my perspective, it's basically getting more situational awareness of your environment. The more situational awareness you have, I think the better off that you're going to be. I know it's very broad, but I did it in one sentence.
Perfect. Thank you, sir.
So I'll give you a compound sentence. You've probably heard the phrase, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. I've been talking about it's not the technology that gets in our way of doing this. And the second half of that sentence is networking is not just for machines. And I've talked about the importance of partnership. You got to move above the technology problem paradigm to really succeed at this.
My sentence is about lobbying together to get the tools that you need from people that have money to help you. So kudos to LA Unified and to Shelby and Fortinet and other organizations that helped lobby to get some money to buy tools for you folks.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending. We appreciate it.